All right. Happy Earth Day, everyone. I'm Katie Bradford Osborne. I'm the founder and curator of Roaring Artist Gallery. We are a fully virtual art gallery that shows exclusively the work of women identifying and non-binary artists. And I am so excited to be here today celebrating Earth Day. We have a panel of artists who are all so different. And the beautiful thing that they have in common is they all have a focus with their art towards sustainability and environmentally friendly art practices. So I'm really hoping we will leave here not only with some new information and wisdom, but I know I would love some new ideas that I can use to introduce some more environmentally friendly practices into my own art practice. So I'm really excited for today. Leading this roundtable is Inge Flinte. She is the curator of Transient Bodies, the exhibition that these artists are all a part of. Inge has done such an awesome job. I can't even tell you, of bringing these artists together and curating this fantastic exhibition. If you have not yet explored it for yourself, Transient Bodies is in our 3D virtual gallery at roaringartistgallery.com, and it's going to be there until June 1st, 2023. So if you're watching this on Facebook afterward, on YouTube afterwards, then if it's not June 1st, 2023 yet, you really want to go see it. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Inge.
Hi. It's been such a huge privilege to work with these artists. I've just found it such an inspiring experience, and I'm really excited to talk to everyone today and learn a little bit more about your practices. And so I think first up, everyone can introduce themselves and briefly explain, what they do. Who would like to start? Sophia, would you like to start? Okay, thanks, Erin.
Yeah. Hi.
You're like, this is a teacher moment, isn't it? It's like you're looking for like, come on, kids.
I'm Erin Patton McFarren, and I create cyanotypes. I'm living and working in the Midwest in Indiana, and I create my artwork in natural waterways.
It's cool. We can edit out the like awkward pauses. Who else? Can I get you to go next, Sophia?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Sofia Gonzalez. I am currently in Sonoma County, which is just north of San Francisco in the Bay Area. In my work, I use textiles as well as natural pigments. I create my own natural dyes and pigments to create with paint with different plants and vegetables that I forage from the neighborhoods around me. I use a lot of working on walking as well as running in my practice to try to understand and visualize my sense of place through color.
Cool. Saskia, can I get you to go next?
Sure. Hi, and thank you very, very much for having us here. It's a real honour. So my name's Saskia. I'm based in Buckinghamshire in England in the United Kingdom. And I hand weave vegan fine arts that elevate sustainable luxury living. So I use the ancient craft of weaving to create contemporary artwork. And I use it to highlight our shared need to live in greater harmony with nature.
Cool, thank you. Eve, can I get you to go next?
Yeah, now this is the moment when my English department turned off.
You're doing good, don't worry. You're fine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eve, and I'm Ukrainian, but I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. And I work with many mediums and explore different subjects. And finally, I guess like I'm at the moment when I'm redefining myself as an artist and what I do. It's very hard for me to share what exactly, like pick one thing, like I paint this or I paint that. And I realized after pondering about it that I'm exploring a human experience, what it means for me to be human, what it means to see others doing that. And I started using natural pigments and earth pigments about 3 years ago. And there is never had been anything more exciting than that. And I'm very excited to be here with you all.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the first question I have for you guys is, what advice do you have for other artists who are interested in making their practices more sustainable, and maybe like one positive step people could take? Because that's a question I did have come in from my Instagram, and I think a lot of artists think it feels like they feel like there's a roadblock. Do you know what I mean? Like they're like, I want to do that, but I'm not sure how. So if you guys have any great advice, yeah, who'd like to go first?
I don't mind going first with kind of where I started, I suppose. My piece of advice would be to take away some of the unsustainable practices, or take something away. So I went through a big shift a few years ago in my practice, where I knew I was really connected with nature, and I was really inspired by the forests around us, and I felt this kind of really deep connection, but my work was kind of too broad, and it didn't really kind of deeply show this kind of feeling I had. So what I started to do was clear out like yarns and influences and bits of materials I had around the studio, and actually pare back, and then what was left was a few plant-based yarns, which then I carried forward and sort of started working with. So it was almost like I didn't need to kind of go out. I actually found I did have something in there in terms of materials that spoke to that connection more truly, more honestly, but I had to clear away all the clutter first. And I realized I just had so much clutter. I had so much in the studio physically, but also then that meant mentally, and it also meant in terms of storytelling, like I couldn't tell a clear, deep, focused story with my work until I got rid of the other things. So I know it's not everybody finds getting rid of things very easy, but even if they're kind of parceled away into a box or put aside, like I found that really a powerful step for me.
So could you tell me what were you doing beforehand? Like, because I know where your art is now, but what were you doing previous to this? What kind of weaving were you doing?
Well, prior to that, I was kind of connecting with lots of different stories. So although I was inspired by nature and my experience in nature, I also was inspired by motherhood and lots of other things. So I was using a huge range of materials. In fact, I used to call them domestic materials. So it was anything that I kind of connected with around the home, whether it was baker's twine or parchment paper for cooking. Like I used to just use all these things around me, and then I bring in natural twigs and bits of yarn, vines and things, and bring everything together. But it was just too much. There was too much going on that I couldn't kind of narrow in, and I wasn't even purely weaving at that point. Sometimes I'd then flit away and do a bit of painting, and I'd make things with textiles and then paint over them. And again, some artists work really well moving from medium to medium, but for me, I just found I was never getting really good at one thing, and I couldn't talk about it really well. And you could live a million lifetimes, couldn't you, in terms of all the things you could do, and probably every artist here could. They're probably multi-talented in so many ways, but I just realized that I just wanted to have an impact in one way. And so I kind of by pairing it all back, that's what worked for me. That's when I could kind of bring together. And it still was a long journey then to get the confidence to bring in talking about the fact it's all plant-based or vegan or anything like that. Like there was still a whole journey, but the start of it was just getting down to the handful of yarns and nothing else, and saying, right, you're just going to work with these and your loom and nothing else, and see what happens. And actually, weirdly, the constraints meant the work got so much better and bigger, and yeah, it just kind of grew from there. So I still do that. I haven't moved on from that point.
I think that's a really great idea, because yeah, I feel like you're speaking to me, you know, because I feel like I'm like, I want to do this and I want to do that and I want to do that after that, you know. And I think the idea of just limiting yourself is actually a really helpful. I think sometimes we find there's just so much freedom and constraint, but that's not really what the world tells us, is it? It's do more.
Yeah, and it really felt like I'd given myself permission to enjoy the one thing I wanted to do, and to go, yes, of course, there's always other things. And I can still turn around tomorrow and say, right, I'm going to bring something else in. That's fine. It's not, it doesn't mean I'm limited forever. But actually, it felt like a big weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I can concentrate on that really core sustainable message. And again, going sort of, well, joining to the original question, like it also meant that I took all of my influences in terms of, I love really wild, rugged trees, and I love this and I love that, and all these aspects. And I really want to talk about deforestation, and like there were so many messages, but actually the work wouldn't have the clarity it's starting to gain if I didn't focus in on one thing. So it's sort of everything has tied together, and but starting with like just the physical thing helped get to that kind of more passionate place in terms of sustainability in my work as well. So it's been good, but it's a long journey, and it's not something that happens overnight. So even if it's something that somebody commits to, it's just, again, to be gentle on themselves, or to say, just to start with small things and see if that works for them, I suppose, as well.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. Is anyone who would like to go next?
I have a response, just kind of the way that Saskia was speaking about how the materials are actually really connected with the concepts in your work, and they became really like married to each other, and one is, they're almost a kindred spirit. They're one and the same, and they're influencing each other. And for me, that's the advice that I would give to, and what I found in my own work is, once I kind of got really clear about what I wanted to talk about in my work and what I was passionate about in the world around me, and just what I wanted to communicate and understand better through environmentalism, was through my art. And so I started to question what materials I was using and where they came from and where they ended up after I was done using them. Before I was an acrylic painter, I was doing landscape painting using acrylics and trying to memorialize the places that were so important to me. And then I, at the same time, realized I was using plastic. Acrylic paint is plastic. And after I was done, it would all wash into the water and go right back into the landscapes that I was studying and that I was so in love with. So that's kind of when I shifted and started working more towards natural dyes. So I think for artists looking to become more sustainable, just getting really curious about what you're using and where it comes from. I really love and nerd out about color and where the history of color comes from, where our pigments came from, where they're coming from now compared to before, when most of our pigments were earth pigments or plant pigments or made from bugs and all that good stuff. And so I think really asking the question, although can be challenging, and just seeing if it aligns with your work. If it's not, then you can kind of start to make those shifts that Saskia suggested. I think is great to kind of see where you can edit out and find purpose in your materials, and then allow that to also inform, the concept and the subject matter of your work at the same time.
Cool. Yeah. So do you do your own paint at the moment, or how do you do a lot of natural dyeing? Do you want to just expand on that just a little bit?
Sure, of course. I started studying natural dyes when I was in graduate school in 2014, I think. So maybe 2013. It's been a long time, maybe 10 years actually, since I've been using natural dyes. I took a class with Devore, who's one of the foremost artists in slow textiles and slow fashion movement. And it was just incredible to see the colors that I could create from the weeds in the neighborhood in San Francisco. And it was all the same colors that I was trying to mute and get from my acrylic paints, but there was just something that was so just rich, and there's like a depth to them. If you've ever used natural colors, there's just a different luminosity to them. Like the greens always have a little bit of red to them just by way of the plants. So I started using natural dyes mostly for textiles, using mostly silks and cottons and things like that. And then more recently, I've been interested in seeing how I can use the dye bath. So once I've dyed the textiles in it, there's usually still a pretty large pot of dye that may be exhausted, meaning it's not going to dye the textiles as saturated or as deep anymore. But there's still potent pigment in there if you distill it and break it down into pigment. So I've been learning how to use that dye bath, the exhausted dye bath, to then create a lake pigment, which is a chemical solution. I'm coming all at it from like kitchen chemistry. My science brain is not there. So I'm just excited about the color experiments. But basically you switch the pH enough so the pigments float to the bottom of the container. And then you have this really saturated pigment that you can either dry and create dry pigment that you can then rehydrate to create paint. I've been rehydrating it to create printmaking ink actually, which has been really fun to experiment with. And you can also rehydrate it to create ink if you wanted to as well. And it also is then a dry, stable pigment that you can keep on your shelf rather than grow mold, which I've definitely grown a lot of mold as well. But it just, there's so much you can do with it. And I'm really excited about the way that you can use the natural dye bath to dye your textiles, but then rather than just, you know, get rid of the rest of that dye or that colored water, you can keep using it in different forms. So yeah, the paint, I'm taking a course right now through Maya Textiles, which is a really great botanical dye resource in teaching textiles school online. So I'm hoping to learn more about the paint this year and this summer as well when I'm done teaching. So yeah, there's so much you can do with it.
Sounds so cool. Yeah, that's really fun because I've been reading a lot about lake pigment, but you know, sometimes it just kind of goes like over my head and I'm like, what do they mean by that? But you've explained it really beautifully there, so thank you.
Problem solve with you. It's a lot of trusting yourself and letting yourself make a mess.
That's what I found. Like there's no you can read and you can learn, and then you just have to do and screw it up quite a lot. So what did we just had Katie, do you want to just read that comment we just got through?
I can see it too, Doris. Yeah, it is Maiwa out of BC. Yeah, they're out of British Columbia.
Okay.
Yeah, I can put the link in the
and can you, maybe we'll include that link as well to the resource where you're learning how to make some paints. That would be kind of cool to include in the notes. Okay, shall we move on? Erin, would you like to, what advice do you have for other artists?
Oh, this is just a perfect continuation of what both of you have said so far. My work is very much a meditation, and that I really have tried to look at limitations and challenges and turn them around as inspiration. So, you know, by either limiting your studio or what you're working with, or if you want to remove something from your practice, that becomes a great launching point for what you can work with. So I find those limitations to be very exciting and inspiring, even though there's that moment of frustration. You know, it's just so easy to go get the thing you want to buy and, you know, to solve that problem, but to really sit with it and try to come up with a more sustainable solution gives you, I feel like, a much better result. So it's been really interesting to hear both of you talk about that. And then in my own work, the body of work that I have in this show, it came from the riverbank being too frozen for me to actually approach it safely. So I couldn't get to the open water. And so I collected snow in my backyard and melted it by the fire, and then used that water to create my images. So again, being limited, not being able to do what I normally do for my practice led me to exploring something new.
Yeah, I love that. Because if you haven't seen the show, you should. But yeah, we'll go and see the show. But I love Erin's work in the show because you can see like there are frozen elements in the pictures, and you kind of sit there going, what? Like, because it's just, it kind of blows my mind because it's just outside the realm of what people normally use cyanotype for. And I just sit there and I know a lot about photographic processes and a lot about cyanotypes, and I still look at your work and go, I really don't know how she's done this. Like, this is, you know, and the fact that it's you're so limited in the resources that you use is quite incredible. To kind of get what you get, like I just go, what? It just, yeah, it's kind of, it bends my mind. I'm like, what's going on? Yeah, so really, yeah, I spent a lot of time staring at your work going, is that frozen? Like, what? Huh?
Yeah.
Like, it was insane. It was really fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Eve, do you want to, what advice do you have? I think you've got, you have some great advice for us too.
I'm smiling a lot because I'm thinking about my journey, and my journey started into like into pigments and sustainability. It didn't start out of desire to save the world or be more this or that or be very good and not use plastic in my work, but I'm being pretty raw and honest about it. It started out of pure curiosity and extensive burnout as an artist and creative, when I was just taking my plein air box and going to the ocean and just painting myself out, like just I was doing ocean studies, and I just came back from Japan from a very successful show, and I realized I cannot do that stuff anymore, and I just need to reinvent myself and just do what I want, but I didn't know what that was yet. And I remember that journey of healing went through a stage when I started picking up shells, and I'm obsessed with shells and stones, and I always had full packets of those goods since I was little, like little treasures. And I had a very strong desire to paint with a place, like I was painting the place, painting at my beautiful beach, but I wanted to use the place itself, because I was looking at different shells, and there are different subtle hues. And I didn't know, I was like, what if I make paint out of them? What's gonna happen? Like just this childlike curiosity, what it's gonna make. And I found like this giant orange rock that I was like, oh, this looks cool. And I brought it home. And then it was about the time the pandemic started. And I was just following myself. I was okay, what people do, how do they make paint? And I started exploring. So I think my advice would be that to really ask yourself why you're doing that, to ask yourself why you want to do that, why you want to go and try to be sustainable, what sustainability means to you, why, because I find that there are so many talks about it, but people don't really understand what it means, because I feel like things are only genuine when they're true to us, and why we want to do that. What's your own truth in it? Why you want to pursue this craft? Why you want to limit your practice or this or that? So that would be my advice, to truly deeply look in your heart and to ask yourself why. For me, it was just other like curiosity. And I feel like curiosity and play, it's a main pillar of everything we do that is true to us. It's limitations are also play, because you're playing and like limiting yourself and reinventing yourself. That's how I also sort of limited myself, stopped doing everything I was doing before, everything people knew me for, and just completely started playing. And I feel like my advice would be just to start playing, start reading more, reading more. And I was so hungry, I started reading about how do you make paint, like history of color, everything I could find about the subject. That's how I work. If I find something I'm interested into, I'm like very nerdy and I go very deep into it. Yeah. So, and like stalk people on Instagram, I was like, how do you do this? How do you do that? And that's how it works for me. So I don't know if there's any tangible advice in there, but just, I guess, ask yourself questions and just be a kid and explore. I guess that's it.
Yeah, I really love that. And I love the way that you've come to this, because I feel like a lot of people will be able to relate to it, because you have, you're just kind of introducing an element that really interested you and you wanted to pursue. And like, because you make watercolors from them, don't you?
Yeah, I make watercolors, and I'm actually about to start making oil paints, because now I'm painting oils like for the last year and a half extensively. And I'm like, I have so many pigments I gathered around the world, because everywhere I travel, we have fights with my husband because our like suitcase starts having those little packets of shells and rocks, and he says like, they're the same color rocks you can find in Brooklyn. I was like, no, they're different. We always have those conversations about like why I'm taking those shitty stones from whatever, we pay so much money to bring them in. And that's why, like I make what the paintings we have in the show, those are nudes, and like 80% of them are made with watercolors I made myself. And a lot of ochres, they have this beautiful yummy flesh color that really captivated me. And I couldn't stop, like exploring the hues. And I realized that I don't even need, because commercial ochre is like 3 colors, like unless you go into like some brands. But I was like, but there's so much more, and that's kind of like I'm unstoppable now. Like I'm collecting those rocks and just keep on making more and more things.
Oh, that's so interesting. Like, do you mix? So will you mix pigment colors when you make your watercolor to get different hues, or do you just mix them after you've made them?
Say again, do you mix them? How do I mix them?
So would you mix the pigment pre-making the watercolor, or would you mix them after? Like once you've made the different hues, would you then mix the colors to get the color you want? So I'm not a watercolorist, so I'm curious. It's interesting.
It depends, but usually because there is the whole process when you process pigments, some rocks really want to be pigments and they're very buttery and beautiful. Some of them are very stubborn. So you really, especially as a woman, and find it to be amazing to be hormonal and process pigments when you have your marker and pestle and you like really go at them, or when you're like angry or you need some time to really let it out. And I usually have them processed and then, like different powders, different hues. And then I make each hue into a watercolor paint. So each hue, each like color, I'm looking at them because they're there. Like I'm just looking at them like, tell me, what do I do with you guys? Yeah, so basically I make all different colors. And then when I paint, I already mix them. They, in those ceramic dishes. Yeah, so like, I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you absolutely did. Yeah, see, I never do the processing myself. I just, my son's like, I'll do it. You can pay me. And I'm like, cool. So he's in the garage, like pounding away. Because if you aren't familiar with the process, you have to like basically pound them down with the water and mist. Hang on. So can you say it for me? Because I'm going to get it mixed up.
You pulverize them into like this very fine powder.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a very nice thin sieve, that's a very fine sieve that you can, because I had my own ideas how I like them. And I love the customization that you can combine different kinds of pigments. They all behave differently, and how you can make them more grainy, like you play, it's unlimited play. So what people don't realize when they think of, I feel like a lot of artists don't realize when they think of sustainability, they think of it as something boring and limiting. For me, it's like, oh my freaking God, you can do so much more that one can imagine, so much more things that you can find in a store. And for me, it's a deeper connection because I touch it all, like I stretch my own canvases, I do all, like as many things as I can with my hands in my practice. It makes me very close to every piece of my art that I'm making, like I'm trying to go the opposite from buying pre-made everything, because usually 90% is shitty, not as good, or super expensive, but still not as good as I prefer. So I like to do it myself. Yeah.
Nice. Right, should we move on to the next question? And I think we might have already crossed over a little bit to this question, but we'll go anyway. Okay, so what made you want to move your practice in a more sustainable direction? And was there a pivotal moment? Who would like to start off with that question? Well, okay, I'll start actually. So I feel like in terms of advice, I feel like, you can just do one little thing at a time. I think it's really easy to kind of see the full breadth or like width of what you can do and go, oh my goodness, and feel overwhelmed. So if you just try introduce one thing and you go, oh, that wasn't that hard. And then like later on, you can introduce like one more thing. I've found that so helpful, because then I look at where I am now and where I was 2 years ago, and I think that's a very different place. And for me, like, I know I would look around my practice and go, oh my gosh, like just like what Sofia was saying, like acrylics are plastic, like how am I going to take that out of the waterways? And it's not even plastic, it's plastic tubed in plastic. And then you're like, this is, and they say these are like a little recycle, but like a recycle motif at the back of the paints, that I don't like from my understanding of recycling, I know that you do need to, it needs to be clean. And I'm like, how does one, like, unless I was to cut it open and completely clear it out, there was no way that it was ever going to be recycled. And I know some recycling places a little bit, you know, it's a bit dubious, like it's getting shipped to China or, yeah. So for me, you know, like looking at that and having the rest of my life, you know, I'm trying really hard to be sustainable, but, you know, looking at my practice, and I didn't feel like that was marrying. So for me, that was a point, a driver. Well, I'm doing it in my life, so why am I trying to do it more in my practice? So that was my moment to kind of move in a more sustainable direction. And yeah, and I found, like what Sophia was saying, there was actually, and you too, Eve, well, I think everyone was saying it actually, there's so much freedom and there's so many interesting things happening with using sustainable materials. Like it's kind of shockingly so, like, you know, and I'm always looking for those moments of unpredictability, or not unpredictability, but like I do a lot of bundle dyeing at the moment, which is basically kind of steaming plants or botanical material into like canvas, or any fabric you're using, but I'm using canvas. And yeah, it's just, you know, when I open up that bundle dye after it's been steamed, and I'm like, I could not predict what's coming out of this, you know, I can kind of, it still surprises me. So I love that element of like, oh my goodness, like how did this happen? This is so exciting. Yeah. And who would like to keep going with that? Who would like to share about their pivotal moment or what made them want to move their practice in a more sustainable direction?
I don't mind going next.
Oh, thanks, Saskia.
That's all right. So I was just thinking while you were talking about what it was for me, and I think mine came into parts. So there was the materials part, but then also the values and the kind of messages that come through my work. And the most pivotal point in terms of my art practice, in terms of the message, was when, I can't remember how many years ago, perhaps 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were slowly transitioning to a plant-based diet. So to be completely vegan and not eat any animals and not consume any animal products like milk or egg. And at the time, we just moved to this amazing area where it's beautiful forests around us, and we were really re-falling back in love with the kind of forests that we'd always sort of had here. And I was making a lot of work about the forests and talking about how I love to go and forest bathe, and I love touching the trees, and aren't we lucky we live in this beautiful, beautiful area. And at that time, I was doing a lot of reading about veganism and plant-based diets and things. And I started seeing all this research that was showing that the biggest cause of deforestation across the world was forests being cut down for animal agriculture. So either to make room for the animals to be kept, or for room to plant soybeans and things to feed the animals that people were eating as meat. And when I thought about that, it was almost like I felt I'd suddenly been focusing on the wrong thing. Like I live in what's called in England an area of outstanding national beauty. So it's protected by the government. You can't just go around willy-nilly building a house here or cutting down a tree there. Everything's done by permission. And that's lovely, but it's a tiny swathe of trees really in the whole, even in our country, let alone the world. Whereas across the world, acres and acres and acres would be cut down every minute just to grow animals to feed other people. So it was, my head almost couldn't cope with it for a while. And I thought, right, I need to switch this. Like I can sit here in my place of privilege and talk about the trees that I love, or I can talk about the trees that are disappearing everywhere to make room for an unsustainable food system. So that, in terms of my practice, was a huge one. It took me ages to come to terms with it, because at first it was kind of really upsetting and I felt a lot of grief around it. And I also struggled with how to talk about it, because I didn't want my work to suddenly become really depressing. And I know some artists can work with negative messages and make it work, but for me that would have kept dragging me down. I needed to be able to talk about it in a sort of positive and uplifting way. So I really struggled with that kind of thing, and I went through like lots of facets of how to kind of explore it in my work. But then that tied into the material side, which around the same time, that was when I think that need to pare back came. And the approach of simplicity was that approach of going back to nature and saying, right, like, let's get rid of all this clutter. Let's get down to the plant-based materials you're already using and say, why build up something like building up an animal agriculture system that's not needed when we could eat the soybean that was being fed to the animal that was causing all the problem. It was almost the same with the materials. It was, I could, you know, at that time I would sometimes weave a lurex yarn or a plastic yarn or anything like that. And I was making works that, yes, wouldn't degrade, that wouldn't, that would perhaps cause problems in the future. Or I could just weave with hemp and nettle and paper and the things that were truly connected to the inspiration that was out there. But also at the end of the day, if I wanted to, or if I was feeling really guilty about making things and putting more stuff into the world, I knew that if somebody wants to throw it on a compost heap at the end of the day, they can, or I can, and it will go, and it will cause no harm whatsoever to the world around it. And so it was a sort of seeking of solace in a way. It was a pairing up this need to make and this understanding that that is my role in the world. And I truly believe that. And I believe that as artists, we do have a really important place to kind of spread messages around sustainability, to spread messages and to talk about really important and actually often quite difficult things if we want to. But I also needed to take care of myself and understand how I could do that positively. So that was the sort of the two shifts for me. But they've been really hard, but then now I'm coming through to the other side. I'm really pleased with where we're going.
So yeah, I mean, that is such an interesting point that you've made about how, yeah, we do have a need to make, but what happens to, you know, what is the life cycle of what we make? Because I did a degree initially in product development, and that's something that we thought about, but no one ever taught us, like, what's the end result of the thing you make or the thing you market, like what's going to happen to it at the end of its life cycle. And I think the same with my art, like what could happen to it? What could, you know, can I put it on a compost? Is it going to biodegrade? Because there's an awful lot of art going out into the world nowadays. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of consumption, and you think, how can I know as the producer of this, the maker of this, to know what its end life is? And I love that with your work. You know that at some stage it will, like, if you put it out in the elements, it's gonna deteriorate. And that's kind of I feel like that could be a really beautiful kind of element. You know, it would be interesting to do a project where you even photographed your work. Sorry, this is just me going on a tangent. You know, degrade over time. I think there's a quiet beauty in that too as well. Anyway, sorry, that's me getting distracted.
No, absolutely. In fact, there's a beautiful book. I'm just looking to see if it's there. I don't know if anyone's read it. It's called Wabi Sabi by Leonard Cohen. Most people probably have, but if not, I highly recommend it. And he talks about the concept of Wabi Sabi from Japan, which I know, Inge, you probably know more than us about. That this idea of imperfection and that things don't last, and or that they are always changing. So like everything degrades in time, whether it's pottery or art, or and actually accepting and enjoying that beauty, as you say. And there's a beautiful bit in the book that stuck with me for so long, where he talks about an artist who, in fact, I'm kind of wondering if it was an artist or it was actually a traveller. They walked into a field of long grasses, basically, and they pulled the long grasses to a like a huge clump of them. They've just pulled the top of it just together, and bound it with a few other long grasses, and then kind of got inside it and then slept in there for the night. So they made themselves a shelter, and in the morning they took off that one piece from the top, and the grasses sprang back out. And it's as though they were never there. Like they made no harm on the landscape, and they created something that then just completely blended back into the environment. And it just, like, I always think about it, and for a long time and I perhaps I will in time, wanted to kind of go down that kind of conceptual art route of making things that are sort of totally transient, that have no impact and have no effect, or maybe just a moment in time. I think there's something so powerful in that. I'm not there with it yet, but yes, that idea that perhaps we could really try and come to terms with something changing is really important. So it's a beautiful book. If anyone wants to read it, it's lovely.
Yeah, it is a hard thing though, isn't it, to, like, even in our own bodies, to recognize that we are changing, constantly changing, and sometimes we will view that change as negative, and phrase is actually like, this is just a natural process, and to be embraced rather than to be kind of avoided. Thank you for that, Andy Goldsworthy. Right, who would like to go next?
Would you drop the name and author of that book into anytime that you'll want to mention a book or another artist or anyone or anything else? That I would love to record all of the resources that you mentioned and be able to put it into the notes, so that would be great. And Doris just said Andy Goldsworthy is a great example of an artist who uses natural resources, and part of his process is the disintegration of the materials. I've seen some really beautiful work about disintegration recently, and I find that so fascinating and beautiful. So I love that. I'm excited to see what you do next, Saskia. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so who can I grab next? Who wants to talk about what was the pivotal moment for them to move their practice into a more sustainable direction?
I have a good one.
Great, I love it. Thanks.
I started out making sculptures, so I cast in resin and welded, and it was literally catching fire. So I leaned over a hot weld. I wasn't wearing the proper gear, and I knew resin was a gamble. I was always wearing respirators, but you're working with very dangerous elements. And catching myself on fire was like, okay, we got to think about something else. And then definitely once I had children, the option to go out in the garage and potentially catch fire became less and less appealing. And so that's really what motivated me to start to work in a more sustainable way.
I love that, because that's the thing about, I mean, like, resin's a fun material. Like, that's the problem. Like a lot of what we use is like, this is actually kind of fun. And so I can imagine you in your studio, like, welding away.
Erin, before we move on, can you say more? I'm so intrigued that you moved from fire to water. Are there any, like, are there any, how did you end up towards water after catching yourself on fire?
That's really pretty amazing. Thanks for making that connection for me, Sophia. That's great. Well, this is over a very long period of time, because I was welding. I was like BC, before children. So like, over 21 years ago. But really the water, I had just always drawn to water, and and I've been playing with cyanotypes for a long time, but then really started taking them to the water on a beach vacation. And then I realized, just sitting and watching the calmness of the water and how great that made me feel. And then I live in a city where there's 3 rivers, but growing up, they're always like toxic and not safe. And there's been a lot of work done to make our rivers healthier and approachable. And so I decided to not make it this elusive thing of going to the ocean, but just why don't I go explore the river closer to me? So that's kind of how I got to water. And I'm a water sign, so.
Found your way back home.
Right.
Sophia, do you wanna keep going on that? What was that
Yeah.
moment for you?
I feel like I shared a little bit when I was thinking about, paint and using that to describe landscapes. I also had a moment in grad school when a mentor asked me why paint, like what I loved about the material of paint. And I didn't have an answer for it at all. So I kind of found my way towards more sustainability through kind of that realization that the material itself was just kind of there. It's just what I thought you had to use to be an artist was to be a painter. That's what I did in growing up. That's kind of what you used to see primarily is painters, and I loved color. So I thought that was kind of the way that I could use color was with paint and control color in that way. So once I realized that paint did nothing for me besides allowed me to mix color, I returned to textiles. I grew up always working with textiles. My mom's a quilter. I grew up doing embroidery and crochet with my grandma. And I think returning to the tactile quality of making through craft-based practices really brought me towards the sustainability of natural dyes. I don't think I would have found my way to it in such a way if I hadn't really switched gears and moved towards textiles. There's something I also wanted to think about too. I think Inge and Saskia were both talking about the act of unpredictability through using natural materials. Inge, you're talking about the bundle dyeing and that magic when you open something up. When I was a painter, I was very controlled. Every brushstroke was in perfect line. Everything was so controlled. I couldn't let go ever, which is, a bigger problem still in my life. But with art, I could not let go. And I love that with natural materials, you have to let go because the nature becomes a part of the making. It's a co-creator with you. And it just has totally changed the way that I think about making in a way that, I don't think I could have found if not. And also it's just very humbling, I think, to find beauty when you let go in those ways.
Yeah, and I love, I'm just so fascinated about your practice, Sophia. It's just, and even just looking at your studio behind you and the sketches you
Still
have.
control. Can't escape it, but
it is control, but you lose that. There is an element that you lose, especially if you're like dyeing textiles. I mean, you can get good enough at it to have a predictability, but there is sometimes an element of like, I can't control this. And, even, what plants are in season, like you can't, when it is, but you have no control over it,
Totally. I think a lot of natural dyers who make more, larger production, if I was selling a series of wearable art pieces or things like that, there is a level of control, of course, that you'd want to have. But I kind of refuse to look at it in that way. I like the fact that it can be a different yellow every day, and even if I use the same plant. And I think that really helps you learn about a place too, and be really focused on where you are in that moment in time in a physical place as well. It allows you to be really attentive to what's in season, what's around you, and to kind of be sustainable in that way by just being aware and observant.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Eve, did you want to finish us off on that question?
I was just thinking, Sophia, you voiced perfectly. My work before pigments was very controlled and very. I have master's in electrical engineering, so I'm also. I think took a part in why I'm like so obsessed with symmetry. I think it like traumatized my brain to some extent. The 6 years in university and doing something I didn't really like doing, by doing it excellently because I was getting it for free, So I feel like that added this structure in my brain. I also have ADHD, so it's kind of also certain safe territory. And when I started doing that ocean period in my life and discovered pigments, and I just allowed things to bleed, to flow, let go of any control, and all my ocean paintings were just like uncontrollable, wash off everything, and and I was okay with that. And it's interesting how you were sharing, and I was looking because there is a old radiator in my Brooklyn apartment which looks very crappy, but I like to put all my pigments and shells on it, like a beautiful altar and display of what I like. And I have a ceramic dish full of pigments that I found in different places. And I feel like what really turned me in is that they are like treasures, and there is a transformational element that you can take an ugly looking rock and then process it, and it will give you the most amazing hue of orange with like specks of like, I don't know, red and yellow, and then you can just look at it and it's just like an ugly rock at first, but then it transforms into so many different things. Like you said about yellow, it can be like different yellow every day from the same plant. And I guess what really hooked me and pushed me towards that path in my art practice is, I keep on looking at my rocks. I don't know, I'm like, I'm gonna take them.
Fellow artists, they're there with you. We want to meet them.
I'm like my imaginary friend. Yeah, it's this ceramic dish that my husband made, and it looks like a cat bowl. So like, yeah, and there are like some rocks, and this one's actually the very first rock I ever processed, and it's so beautiful. So I'm afraid of running out of it, because it's so just perfect. And I feel, yeah, what pushed me towards that sustainable path is that transformation, like my inner, like for me, it all roots in my experience. And I loved how Saskia shared about her journey and her coming to peace with what she truly believes in and how to tie it to her practice and to her way of living. And that's why I genuinely believe each of us should find that with ourselves, and that will make whatever we are doing truly precious and truly ours. And yeah, so this transformational element, like it transformed my depression and allowed me to paint freely outside of my controlled borders, and it showed me that even an ugly rock that I often consider myself to be can transform into beautiful colors, depending on the day and depending how you process it. Yeah, so that's, I guess, more philosophical way of saying why I'm continuing with that.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I love that. I think we have, Katie, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, go ahead. If we go over just a few minutes, it's not a problem for me. If anyone else wants to leave a little earlier, that's totally understandable, but yeah, feel free.
Okay, so I mean, if you guys have an idea of, I want to ask you guys how you source and select your materials, but if there is something else you'd like to talk about instead of that, I'm happy to like, I'm happy to go with whatever. So what do you guys think? Would you like to talk about your materials and maybe any ethical issues around sourcing materials? This is the awkward pause that you're going to be editing out. Katie. Are we happy to go with that?
Yeah, we can talk about materials.
Yeah. Okay, you can kick us off, Sophia.
Okay. I like I said, I use natural materials, and for me, it's really important to use materials that I find in the neighborhoods around me. You can purchase natural dyes online, and I think that's a really awesome source for people getting started with it or who do not have the time or space to create natural dyes. But really what I love about natural dyes is that they're so easy. Like if you have a kitchen, if you have a pot and water and some onion skins, you can create natural colors. So there's an accessibility there that is actually, I think, more accessible than people may think. The way I source my materials is usually by season. I go on walks to try to identify new plants. And then I also do research right now I'm researching more indigenous ethnobotany about my area here in Sonoma County to learn about traditional plants that were used for both medicinal purposes, food purposes, and color as well. I found this thinking of Eve, your potentially ugly rock that can make beautiful colors, which the rock is now beautiful too, of course. I found this remarkably ugly mushroom since moving here in July. It's called Dead Man's Foot, and it actually looks like dog poop on the side of the road. And I kept seeing it on my walk, and I was kind of terrified to collect it because it could have just been dog poop. But I researched it, and it's incredible Dyer's mushroom. And I foraged it. I got it in this bag, and I brought it home, and it made the most remarkable, like glowing golden yellow, kind of like the color of your beanie, Erin, like just this rich mustardy color, and all kinds of rust that I've been wanting to achieve but haven't. And it was just this epic ugly mushroom that made the most stunning colors. And now I have to wait all year, like Inge said, I have to wait now until it comes back in the fall. But there's something about collecting your own materials that makes that exciting, right? I'm really in touch with the cyclical cycle of the year, and just there's always a next season to look forward to. So right now here in my area, I should have brought some inside, but it's sour grass, which is this weed that pops up after the rain in most of California and throughout different areas that it's called sour grass. It has this little yellow flower at the top and a big green stalk. And I grew up, you can pick it and chew it, and it's sour because of the oxalic acid in it. And it makes this neon yellow just by putting those flowers in water. It's magical.
I'm like gutted, Sophia, because like I photographed these flowers when I lived in California, and I'm like, what are these flowers? And yeah, you're right, they'd come up in that springtime after the rain, and there must be so many of them. And I'm like, and we've just moved away, and I'm like, oh, it's not, I could have died with you. Like, it's a little bit so like good. I'm having a bit of like remorse here.
No, I understand. A missed opportunity feeling, but then it's also like a next time, if you're ever back, it's like a chance for it to happen again.
It's true. It's true.
In terms of choosing my other materials, I try to source organic textiles as much as I can, and I also like to use scraps from people's textiles. I became friends with a wedding dress designer when I was in San Diego, and she actually gave me a lot of her scraps of silk and things like that. So I try to use cast-offs or old fibers as much as I can. With natural dyes, really only sticks to natural materials, which kind of speaks to what on earth our other textiles are made of. Also plastic, I'm sure. But since moving to Sonoma County, there's a lot of farms, and I see sheep every day. And my goal is to really connect with more natural fibers since moving here, that I can actually source the fibers more locally from where they're created, as well as the plants. So that's my hope for further making my materials more sustainable.
I love that. That where you mentioned that you got some offcuts from your from a wedding dress designer. I think if you're wanting to get into this, definitely, like I've heard of an artist who is actually just sourcing her she's painting on denim, and she's getting like kind of like cast-offs from denim manufacturers. So even approaching, manufacturers and saying, hey, can I use your old stuff or stuff that you don't want? Because there's so much wastage, and there's so much potential in that too. So I love that. That's really cool. And I love the idea of seasonality and the mushroom thing. Like, I wish Heather was here, because Heather's another artist who's exhibiting. And one of her works, like I noticed when I was going through them, has like, mushroom ink. And I'm like, didn't even think about making, ink with mushroom, because you kind of look at them and you just go, you wouldn't expect there to be a whole lot of color coming with them, but it absolutely is. So I think that's really interesting. I feel like I want to go. I've seen mushrooms recently, so I'm like, I want to go pick them. That's really cool. Do you find like there are ethical issues that you need to address about foraging, Sophia? Is that something that you want to?
That's a great question. Thank you. I was going to say something about that. Definitely, yes. I've been reading a lot about kinship recently. If you haven't read works or heard anything by Robin Wall Kimmerer, she's a wonderful Native person here in the United States who works a lot about trying to find more ways that we can but create a more respectful relationship with our plants and animals, rather than call them it or things, and thinking about their personhood or planthood or whatever the appropriate word is for them. So I've been thinking a lot about how to have a relationship with plants as I'm collecting them, even silly things just as like addressing the birds in the morning as I'm walking, or thanking the plant for allowing me to forage its leaves today. In terms of how and when to collect, it's definitely thinking about not taking all the sour grass or every mushroom that you see. I always leave at least 75% of a plant left in its environment, especially if it's a native plant, because you don't know how many other beings are using that plant or how it's interacting with the ecosystem around it. There is an area in which us as humans tending the environment does spur new growth. So I think about that like as a farmer or a gardener would. If you're trimming back a plant, that actually often inspires new growth. So not, of course, hacking the whole plant down, but thinking about the ways that you are supporting the ecosystem by tending to plants so they can grow further. I also think about invasive species too. I use a lot of invasive plants in my dyes. Things like eucalyptus bark that are invasive to California, yet they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere. When you think of California, at least on the coast, I think of eucalyptus. So if the bark falls, I'll collect as much bark as I want. That's not as much of concern. It actually helps to clear areas, and it can be a fire hazard to leave a lot of that dried bark on the ground. So kind of understanding what plant you're collecting, what its purpose might serve and its place might be in the environment, and then thinking about the ethics of how much you should take, when you should take, and how you can leave the rest for the rest of the beings in your area.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the only place I've seen more eucalyptus, and it's like I'm living in Australia, there's a lot of eucalyptus, but it's Southern California, like there was a ridiculous amount. Yeah. Who would like to, and that's really like, I've been thinking like, oh, should I pick up that bark and use that in bundle dyeing? I wonder what color that would be. So I feel very curious.
Beautiful rust and oranges. Yeah. And
nice.
Same with the leaves as well.
Yeah, I've been using sorry, this is getting geeky now, like an iron mordant in order to get like blues, because I want blues. But yeah, I love the idea of using them in their natural format to get that rust as well. Erin, would you like to go next? Do you have, how do you source and select your materials? I mean, yours is quite I won't say simple, but you have very few materials, I suppose, that you need to gather.
It's very minimal in that, you know, I use watercolor paper. I would like to find different watercolor papers that maybe are more sustainable, but it also has to work well with the medium. And then I buy my chemistry in bulk. So I'm not buying a bunch of little bottles, but larger batches. I mix everything on my own. And then also the other medium that completely affects all my work is the water. So fresh water versus salt water. If I am working, I really love in the late August, September, we get algae and duckweed, which can be kind of toxic to our environment and our waterways, but it makes this lovely, like sparkly white spots on my work that I really enjoy. So that's another thing that I feel like, well, I'm kind of helping to pull it out of the water. You know, I'm using some of those things. And then to be more sustainable too, I'm very cautious about any runoff. The original 1864 or 1846 recipe I use does not have the chemical that a lot of photographers use that produces more contrast and is carcinogenic. So what I create ends up, I mean, we actually use some of it in our table salt to keep it from clumping. So at worst case scenario, it makes the iron salts are somewhat of like a tree fertilizer. So I do not directly rinse all of that in our waterways. I've really been working hard to catch it on the paper and then let it run off onto a rag that I can take home and clean. So I'm not getting the runoff into the water. I've really been working hard to do that. But, you know, if I go to a lake, I'm in an area where there are a lot of natural lakes and they're more acidic, so they produce grays and different temperatures.
That's so interesting.
It's so wild. I know. And there was another lake I was working in and I didn't realize it, but my brother told me it was attached to a steel mill. So it's a very dirty lake. And so it pulled up different colors. When I've been out in freezing temperatures, sometimes I get more purples in the blues. So someone asked me one time, like, are you going to just stay with blue? Because you can tone and I've worked with turmeric before, but I think the spectrum of blues that I see produced from the different bodies of water are so fascinating.
Yeah. Even like the piece behind you, so vibrant. That blue is so vibrant, and I know that I'm seeing it through like like a crappy phone lens, and it would be probably more vibrant in person. So I find that really interesting.
Erin, I've actually had a question come through about your process for that piece. Would you mind telling just a little tiny bit about it? I know we'll be speaking to you more next Friday as well. So
it's one of the first larger pieces that I created. And so it's been difficult to source large enough watercolor paper, but I have been able to find some in rolls. So this was created on a large piece of watercolor in the St. Joseph River, which is right by my home. So it was I did it in the spring. So the water is still pretty clear. I have the partner piece to this I did in September, and it has little sparkles from that duckweed algae that was present at the time. But this one was just created in the spring. You know, the other element that makes a tremendous difference in my work is the sunlight and the temperature. So if I'm out working in July, I have to work quickly because things work very fast, things evaporate and dry. So this was actually created in the springtime. So it's kind of a leisurely piece. I didn't have to work very fast. I could let it rest. And so the piecing of it was a little bit different, but it was created by the currents that were in the water in the river right by my home.
Beautiful, I love it. And you coat your work with cold wax, is that correct? Like, do you coat the...
Oh, when I finish it, yes. I just do it because the glass gives it, when it's framed, has a glare, but also because it's natural, I want you to be directly involved with the artwork and not have that layer of separation. So I did trial and error a bunch of different things with, acrylic medium, but I really found cold wax was the most transparent. And then it really kind of makes your colors more luminous. It's a watercolor technique. So Eve, I see you nodding your head. Yeah. So you can just see things directly, and it's so beautiful that way. So yeah, I do. When my finished pieces, when they're framed, are sealed in cold wax, so there's no glass on it. It's just you and the work.
It's also so satisfying to apply it. You said it, and I'm like, I'm so a tactile person. It means a lot to me, and I cannot stop staring at that piece. I really regret that it's I cannot be in person to experience everybody's work, like just really bury my eyes in it, to savor it in person. And it's just one of the regrets of while we it's amazing because we can be all together now, even though we are separated by places. But but the negative part for it, I was like, I really want to see that blue. I really want to touch. I'm the person who really wants to touch stuff in the museums, and it's not good. But I'm like, I really want to touch things, and not just with my eyes.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm the same way. I that's what I love. There's a lot of great visual texture in everyone's work in this exhibit, and it's just so beautiful to see that, and then how the materials lend themselves to that element of texture.
Yeah, I love that. Did you want to keep going on that? How do you? Well, you kind of touched on that, didn't you? You kind of do you want to talk a little bit more about how you source and select your materials?
I just realized, ladies, that for myself, even about because I was focusing a lot on pigments and kind of obvious things, but I just realized that actually it started before pigments when I was just like, wow. It's interesting how to me it really ties to my relationship with myself and how it kind of goes. from that, I really want to paint big, like really big, like I said once to universe, like I really want to paint big. I'm so tired of my owls. And I was making those whimsical owl pieces that are usually like smaller. And then within like a week, my friend, who's an opera singer and director of Brooklyn Music School, invited me for lunch. And I also said, I want to paint something rather than owls, like something, because you got known for something. People only want this, this, and you want to paint myriad of other things, but afraid that people will reject that. And I was a younger artist back then. That was important to me, what people think. Now less, but still important. So it's interesting, she invited me for lunch and she said, I saw your new work you posted, and I want to invite you to paint a backdrop for the opera, which is 20 by 20 feet. And it was interesting because we met in a cafe, and at that moment when we were talking, it was a song, Madame Butterfly, playing. That is her part, like her part she's usually singing. It was like also magical and like in the movies. And I remember that after I finished that giant canvas, and I was crawling on it, like and painting that, we had parts of canvas left. And that was the first that I was repurposing, and like they would throw it away, and I took it all home, like all different pieces, and I stretched it as my first canvases. Then I started using my husband's linen shirts that had some holes developed like in different areas. I was like, I'm going to use them as my canvases. Linen is expensive. So I remember like I started using those things because I didn't upgrade myself to, first of all, to buying linen or something else, because I thought I'm going to be a shitty canvas maker. So let's start with something like that people would discard anyway. So that's what I would start doing. And I also, when I paint for a season, I use at the beach, I use just cotton sheets, old bed sheets. And when the season is over, I take them and I stretch them as my canvases too. And I feel that they hold this energy there with me every single time I paint. Sometimes I cry, sometimes I laugh. Like they silent witnesses of everything I process. And I feel like I want to also, like, I feel I have this thing with incorporating like places into my art, and also like props too, I guess. Like I sit on it, and now I want it to be a next piece. Like I have a few pieces like behind me, like those guys I painted on the sheets like that. Yeah, so this is like another, I just realized I've been doing that for a very long time, and it's also part of sustainability, I guess, which is, I was like, wow, I've been doing that for a very long time, and I didn't even give myself credit for that. But it was so, you see why I keep on saying that it's very important to look back in yourself, because when I want to be, for example, I read of people doing those sustainable practices, and they not necessarily may find like sit well with me. For example, I would be like, why would I be doing that? Oh, okay, like, like, but when it comes organically, then it kind of pulls to different things, and then it truly becomes a part of me. And that's what I'm trying to find. That's why I'm trying to be always open to things. And that's why I'm incredibly happy to listen to all of you and all your stories. And they're so different, and so many different aspects of how it came to you and how it talks to you, that really teaches me and opens up my eyes into different areas of my practice that I can explore even more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It has been a bit of a learning, like a learning curve, like a learning experience, just listening to everyone talk about their practice and sustainability. And Saskia, can I get you to finish off with, like, I'm interested to hear how you source and select your materials too.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So I do view materials as a complete journey, and I know that for the rest of my life and career, it's going to keep evolving. But where I'm up to now is that I use about 4 or 5 different plant-based yarns, and I source them from a UK, they're not even a UK manufacturer necessarily, but they're just pretty much the only place in the UK where I can get paper yarns and hemp yarns and nettle and linen that I can weave with. So they are my they're like my base that I use for most things. And I make artworks on a really, really large scale and increasingly larger. So I need to be able to get enough of a product that I can then weave with, which ties into so many of the things that everybody's been talking about, and the kind of idea that it's a sort of challenge to think about accepting that things might not be the same, but equally I need to get enough of something to produce the thing that I need, either for my own collection or for a client's commission, that kind of thing. So that's my sort of base. And then I have recently started using an amazing company called Yarn, and I'll share them in the I'll share it in the chat, because they ship worldwide, and they produce a really beautiful they curate a really beautiful collection of sustainable yarns. So they do everything from recycled sari silks, which have been cut into these beautiful strips, through to small batch production, hand spun, hemp, nettle, jute, all sorts of natural plant-based fibers, and they are all made by small collectors of women in places in India and also other places in the world. So they're basically supporting small co-ops to produce these amazing yarns, and these yarns are like the next step up. Basically, they are much more kind of rugged and natural, and they have the kind of, you know, the knottiness and the hairiness still in them, and they're wonderful, and they're getting that much more like earthy richness to them. So I've been really excited to use those, but I can't use them with weaving. The first yarns you put on the loom are the warp, and then everything that you weave into it is the weft. I can't use those really, really textured ones at the warp at the minute. They're not strong enough, or there's too much variation. So they have to be in the weft. So I have the sort of combination. So I've been starting to bring that in. And that's been working really well. But then the next sort of stages for me are, I have had a lot of suggestions from people to explore spinning and potentially making yarns. I have a friend who is a kind of woodland or forest expert, and he takes nettle and processes it himself and can make yarns from it, for example. So I'd like to tell
us what nettle is, just before you keep going. Like what
nettle.
Oh, nettle. Sorry,
nettle. Sorry.
Okay, nettle. Yeah, nice. No, okay, here we go.
So nettles. So he processes that and makes yarn from it. So he wants to teach me how to do that, for example. So I have kind of like a little list in the background of things that I want to explore when I have a bit more time, or when I'm able to kind of like just slowly incorporate like one more new thing into the practice. Because I find weaving takes so long. It's just such a lengthy process to weave that at the minute with my practice, I'm a little bit cautious of bringing in something, but I know I want to get to them. But the other thing that I think ties into something Sofia was saying about using reclaimed materials, that I've just been talking to an interior designer about recently. So I try and work directly with interior designers to make pieces for their clients. It just kind of works really well for my practice at the minute. And she's she's kind of one of the best in terms of sustainability in the UK, and that everything she does is tied into sustainability, not only how she runs her business, but how she approaches client projects. And it can be a real challenge, because especially she's in the kind of luxury high-end interior sector, and that's an area where it's quite common for clients to come in, buy a property of often substantial size, and they'll gut it, and everything goes in new. So she is trying to work with her clients and kind of educate them on like what could we do differently. And one of the things we were talking about was taking some of the fabrics that might be in a client's property already, not one that they've just bought, but if they've come from a home before and perhaps had beautiful curtains that they'd loved, blankets, anything like old shirts, like anything that they have an interest or a connection to, like a real like personal connection. Could we take those, and I would take the strips of them and then create and weave artworks from them. And the other side, interesting at the same time, is that I'm speaking with a high-end fashion company at the minute. And again, fashion is not something I generally want to touch too much, because it's a really problematic industry. But this fashion designer is attempting to work in sustainable fashion every aspect they can, and they save every single scrap of remnant fabric from their processes. So again, we're talking about, can we get some of those fabrics and weave them in? So just interestingly too, potential clients have come at the same time with this real interest in using up scraps or reusing bits and pieces. So what I'm doing is making up a sample like artwork, like a really large scale artwork to show with some of my own reclaimed materials to show them what that could look like. And I'd be really interested to see if that then takes me off on a new avenue to kind of work collaboratively with clients to reimagine these pieces, and they'll also have that connection to them, whether it's a history just from the fact that they were in previous collections or whether it's a personal connection. I think that's going to be something quite exciting. But yeah, that's very early days with that one.
It's really fun. I really love that. I really and yeah, from I just think about all the houses I've lived in, and you do have like memories attached to old textiles that you think, I don't want, you want to find a better way of, I don't want to just throw this out. I want it to be, it'd be great to be made or created into something new. And that's really kind of what you're kind of looking at, really, isn't it? So
yeah, I think there's a nice history here, at least with people making things like baby quilt blankets, or baby clothes that pieced together. I also know somebody that does the like a memory teddy service where they take, if somebody's passed away, they take clothing from that person and then they make into like a teddy that a child can keep if it's someone that's, while the child has been young. So like really, it can be really deep-seated emotions, and obviously then sustainability is kind of a part of that, but I think that's, it's just important in lots of different ways, but I think it just brings more meaning to the work and makes it more purposeful.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Well, I think this is, we're drawing to the end of our roundtable today. I just wanted to just chip in with a couple of things if you're an artist listening to this later on and thinking, but I just use regular acrylics, or I wanted to point you in the direction of a couple of different resources you could look at. I think there's a company in the States, although they have outlets around the world, I think, called Natural Earth Paint. They have pigment you can buy, and they also have resources to show you how to make your own oil paint and watercolor, as well as they've just created I bought it a couple of years ago, a plant-based acrylic that you can mix pigment into, which is kind of fun. So you don't have to worry about plastics going down the waterway. And as well as that, Golden, who make acrylics, have released, I think a couple of years ago as well, that I've been using in my own studio, something called is it Golden Crash Solids, or it's a waste kit basically where you collect all your waste acrylic water and you put it in a bucket until you're ready to process it, and then you put a couple of different chemicals in, and it basically takes all the acrylic waste out of the water. And so when you tip your water out, it's got no acrylic waste in it at all. So I think that's kind of fun. I think they're kind of really easy steps for people who maybe are just acrylic painters to just take, and they're just the little easy steps that you can incorporate, and that would make, like a huge difference, to the sustainability of your practice as well. So, and I want to thank all the artists today. You guys it's been so inspirational to see your work, curate your work, and to meet you, and then to hear your stories today has been, just really beautiful, really inspiring. So thank you so much for your time today. Over to you, Katie.
All right. Well, I want to echo the exact same thing you just said. This has been absolutely wonderful. I have enjoyed this immensely, and I am so inspired to move forward and try some new things myself as well. And I hope that everyone who is watching this feels the same way, because I think that this is a very important thing to be talking about in a positive way, in which you all are. And this has been amazing. So thank you all again. Thank you to everyone who has come to support these artists. Thank you to everyone who will be watching this later on. And have a wonderful Earth Day. keep Earth Day going all year long. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.